Welcome to Pin and Reel, where we discuss comic books, movies, books, and more. I'm your host, Uncle Joel. Let's get into it. So I just got finished watching the Snyder Cut, Zack Snyder's Justice League. Really, I've got a lot of mixed thoughts on this. Now, to start with, I've got to say that I really don't like the discourse that's been surrounding the Snyder Cut pretty much from the get-go. And it seems like people fall into one of two camps. Either you absolutely adore Zack Snyder and you cannot look at anything that he does critically, or you absolutely hate Zack Snyder and you trash every single thing that he does. And I feel like that's one big problem with the entire discourse surrounding this movie, is that objectivity just seems to go out the window. And for instance, if I say anything positive about Zack Snyder, I'm labeled a Zack Snyder lover and a Zack Snyder fanboy, and immediately my opinion is thrown out the window. Likewise, if I say anything critical at all, then the Zack Snyder fans all of a sudden dismiss everything I say and just say I'm a Zack Snyder hater. And I think both extremes are very unfair and very unreasonable. And then the other thing that's been getting under my skin a bit when it comes to talking about this movie is there's been so much contrast and comparison with what Joss Whedon did. And that is understandable and reasonable to a certain extent. However, the Snyder Cut is twice as long. You simply can't compare them for a number of reasons. There's just a lot more time allowed for character development that might not be allowed in a theatrical cut. So personally, I would love to see what Zack Snyder's theatrical cut would have been. Have him cut this movie down to 2 hours and then put that up against the Whedon cut. And that's a point that I'm going to be coming back to a number of times throughout this review. And that's the first point I want to get into here. Even not talking about this movie specifically, but the way Zack Snyder makes films as a whole. Like, he always seems to have this massive 3 or 4 hour cut in mind that simply isn't going to work for theatrical releases. As a result, certain movies like Batman vs. Superman are much better when you get the director's cut, because that's what he intended all along, and he winds up cutting things down and making things make less sense in the theatrical release. And I feel like Zack Snyder kind of needs to figure out what he actually wants to do. If he wants to make these bigger, grander, more epic, lengthy films, then he should probably try to go to, HBO or other companies like that and try to do long-form TV shows. Film a mini-series. And if he's not going to get a mini-series or something like that from HBO or Netflix or whoever it might be, then he really needs to adjust his filming style and learn how to tell a story better in, a 2 hour time frame. So it's not so much that he doesn't know how to tell a compelling story, it's that he often doesn't seem to know how to work within the limits of the framework that he is given. And so, what did I think about the movie? This is a 4 hour film, and it's a lot to digest. I wound up having to split it up into 2 different viewing sessions just because time didn't allow me to cram it all into one sitting. But as I was watching the movie and as I was taking notes on different thoughts and different moments, I came to a number of different conclusions. First, Zack Snyder really likes dealing with high concepts. He doesn't want to simply make an action movie. He wants to actually ask questions and explore ideas with it. Now, this is one of the things that I really liked about Batman vs. Superman, for example. And so in that regard, I feel like he's really trying to do something different than the Marvel movies. Whereas Marvel tends to just be straightforward entertainment, and it doesn't get really too deep or philosophical, Zack Snyder is trying to take these characters and explore interesting ideas and ask big, heavy questions. Unfortunately, I also feel like he often doesn't really know how to explore those ideas very thoroughly. Based off of watching Batman vs. Superman and then now the Snyder Cut of Justice League, I feel like Zack Snyder would be someone who would really benefit from a co-director. A co-director or a strong editorial team who shares his vision but can also help him really hone in on what he's trying to do and what he's trying to say. Because, quite frankly, this movie did not need to be 4 hours long. There is a lot of stuff that I feel like they could have really easily cut out, and the movie would have moved at a quicker pace, and it would have been more interesting, it would have been more entertaining, and you wouldn't really have lost too much. This could have been a 3 hour movie, and I'm sure it would have been pretty much the same, only it would have been more entertaining and easier to sit through. I did find myself getting bored at a number of points, especially in the first half of the movie. Whereas WB tended to cut out too much of his movie, I feel like he left in too much, and so there needs to be a happy medium. Now, I'm going to try not to compare this to the Whedon cut, simply because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I feel like they're completely different beasts. Now, you have double the length of film here, and so Zack Snyder can do a lot more. And if WB came in and told him he had to cut the film in half, even if they themselves didn't make any editorial changes, I feel like this would have been a very different movie. That being said, there are some things I'm going to talk about in regards to the Whedon cut and how it relates to this one. And one of them is the major complaint about the Whedon cut is that there just isn't enough time getting to know any of the new characters, such as Cyborg, Flash, and Aquaman. And that is improved on significantly in the Snyder cut. However, I still don't feel like we really get enough time with any of them. I still feel like Zack Snyder's approach, whether it was sent down by WB or the way that he chose to tell the story, I'm not really sure. But I feel like his approach of doing Man of Steel and then Batman vs. Superman and then jumping straight into doing Justice League was rushing things far too much. It's one thing to introduce one or maybe two new characters that are key characters, but the story needs to revolve around them a lot more. You see, I feel like what should have been done is give Flash his own movie and give Aquaman his own movie prior to Justice League so that we can get proper introductions to those characters, get familiar with their background, their backstory, and what makes them tick and how they function, and then move into the Justice League, where the story can center around a Cyborg. As it is, I feel like Zack Snyder is just trying to cram way too much down into one film. He wants to give us set pieces for Wonder Woman, for Cyborg, for Flash, for Aquaman, and so forth, and just explore far too much, and as a result, he spread himself thin. Because that's probably my major criticism for this movie, because as much content as there is here, and in light of this 4-hour runtime, I feel like it just doesn't have that much depth. We do get more time getting to know each of these characters, but overall, we don't really get enough time exploring any one of them, and so we don't get to know them very well. We've already had time with Batman and Superman in Batman vs. Superman and Man of Steel, and now at the time of this release, we have the benefit of having Aquaman and Wonder Woman movies. We wouldn't have had any familiarity with Aquaman or Wonder Woman outside of Batman vs. Superman and then Justice League. I feel like a team movie should be focused on the team working together and how they function as a group and how they're dealing with the situation, not so much on building and developing the characters individually, which this movie tries to do both. And likewise, I feel like Steppenwolf is a very shallow villain. And honestly, his design is just overblown and overdone. Just the fact that he has so many tiny moving parts and his body is constantly shifting, it just feels really weird and it's distracting and it's too much. I would have liked if they had toned down his armor quite a bit and gave a little bit more screen time into developing him as a villain, as opposed to one or two scenes that really give a little bit of story, but as a whole, he's just this brute that shows up and fights the Justice League. Now, that being said, he is a very foreboding character, and a lot of his action scenes are very compelling. I loved the battle that he had with the Amazons early on in the movie. They did a great job of showing just how intimidating he is, and how powerful and unrelenting of a monster he can be. But overall, I didn't really find that much about Steppenwolf to be very interesting. And if your villain's not that interesting, it's difficult for your story to be interesting. And that being said, I did find the story a bit shallow. However, I also don't think it needs to be super complex. And the only reason that I am at all critical of that is I feel like Zack Snyder stepped away a bit from trying to ask big, heavy questions. Since I really enjoyed that aspect of Batman vs. Superman of, asking questions like, should man have this much power and so forth. Whereas I felt like this movie was a little bit more straightforward in just the basic storytelling. But again, it doesn't need to be complex. I think a lot of people are very unfair when they criticize Justice League for being a fairly simple story when if you look at, Infinity War, it's fairly similar. Thanos is chasing after the Infinity Stones, and he is fighting Avengers and killing people and anybody who gets in his way in order to obtain these elements of power. And that's essentially what Steppenwolf is doing with the mother boxes. So I think it's a bit unreasonable to criticize one and not the other. And then one of the other issues I have, I guess, with Zack Snyder as a director, at least for Batman vs. Superman and Justice League, is I feel like he's looking at it through the lens of a video game designer. The guitar riff that they have for the action scenes really feels like a video game boss fight. Like you might expect to hear that intense music playing when you're going up against the final boss in an RPG, or playing Devil May Cry and you enter into the boss's chamber. All of a sudden that music starts. So it makes it feel less cinematic and it makes it feel more video gamey, which again is not bad per se, it's just really not to my taste. However, what I would say is a little bit of a knock against the movie is a lot of the CGI here also feels like a video game. For instance, in the flashback sequence where they're showing the history of the mother boxes on Earth, they show Zeus fighting against Darkseid and his minions, and he looks very much like a cartoon character. And the whole sequence, when it's not focused on the human actors, really feels like a video game cutscene. Now, some of that is just the weak CGI in certain sequences, but also a lot of it just is Zack Snyder's style, which again, I think a lot of people might enjoy that. I just happen not to. Other little tidbits that I found interesting or difficult. I really enjoyed the way they showed Flash moving really fast in order to save people when they were not using slow motion. I find the slow motion display of super speed often to just kind of be boring for me. I get what they're going for and I can appreciate the style of it, but I find it less compelling. But like there's one scene where the Flash is running around a bunch of people as a bunch of rubble is falling on them and he's batting it away really fast, and there's like flashes of lightning and he's just like zipping around, and I found that to be very visually stunning and very exciting to watch. Whereas the scene where he is with Iris and everything kind of moves in slow motion, I found it kind of dull. So I really appreciate the scenes where they actually show not, hey, the world is slowed down and he's moving normal, but sequences where they show the world moving normal and him just like zipping around faster than you can follow. And in general, I think Ezra Miller's performance as Barry was probably the strongest acting in this movie. I found him most believable as this character, as opposed to simply reciting lines. That being said, I also found it frustrating a lot of the lines that he was given, particularly in that he is given a lot of the comedic lines, but rather than coming out as somebody who's cracking jokes, it comes across as someone who's being stupid for comedic effect. So a good example of this is when Bruce introduces the Flash to Wonder Woman. He says, "Barry, this is Diana." And then Barry says, "Hi Barry, I'm Diana." Oh wait, no, that's not right. And it's supposed to be comedic, but to me, it just makes him look like he's an idiot. It's not played off as though he was making a joke. It's played off as though he really screwed up and said that. And so I don't know exactly what Zack Snyder was trying to do there. I would say he was probably just trying to inject a little bit of humor, but I feel like he does so at the expense of Barry's character. As for the rest of the actors, I didn't find any of their performances really anything special. Most of them weren't bad, but there weren't any that I felt were really good either. I've heard a lot of people talk about how Ray Fisher had such a great performance, but I really don't see that. Really, I think the only reason Ray Fisher is getting so much attention is because of all of the things that he has done on Twitter and all of the allegations against Joss Whedon and WB. So I feel like that stuff has kind of tainted people's perceptions of his performance. Whereas for me, I haven't followed any of that too closely, and I felt like his performance here was just okay. Again, not bad, but nothing special. Now, I do think Zack Snyder is really good at doing these big set pieces and making the action very visually stunning, and it's very interesting to watch. And so if he could condense the movie and focus more on the action and less on the pieces in between that I didn't really connect with, I feel like he can make a very visually compelling and exciting movie to watch. And then, as a quick side note, there is one scene with the Joker in it, Jared Leto as the Joker, and I really didn't care for him. I would say that this solidifies my distaste for him. I felt like all of the backlash against him in Suicide Squad was a bit overblown, but his single small performance here, I really did not like. So overall, I found the movie to be very much of a mixed bag. Like, I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, but I'm not likely to watch it again. Now, there is enough interesting done here that I would be curious to see what Zack Snyder did with Justice Leagues 2 and 3, and I would like to see that story play out. It's just, in general, this doesn't feel like the Justice League to me, and especially with characters like Superman, these don't feel like the characters that I already know and love. You know, I'm a big fan of Superman, and Zack Snyder's Superman just doesn't click with me. So in the end, I would say this movie is just okay. It's not really worth 4 hours, but it's also not bad. I'm very happy for the people who are a fan of Zack Snyder's work, and I'm very happy that they finally got the cut that they've been looking for. And I'm really happy for people who enjoy this movie more than I did. I just think it's a very flawed film, and there are a lot of ways that they can improve it, especially considering that a theatrical cut would have been half the runtime. So if you're a fan of Zack Snyder's work, especially Batman vs. Superman, I do think you're going to enjoy this. But if you're not, I don't think this movie is going to change your mind. And if anything, it might solidify your opinion. If you want to leave a comment, I'd appreciate it. Please, let's have a civil discussion here and respect one another's opinions. And if you disagreed with me, let's discuss the pros and cons of this movie. Let's discuss the merits, and let's actually have a conversation about it, rather than simply bashing any opinion that is different from our own. Because really, that's the whole point of this. That's the whole point of this channel and this video, is I want to have a conversation about the things that we love. If you enjoyed the video, hit like, I really appreciate it. Hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. And until next time, this is Uncle Joel saying, stay tangible.